In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to factor trinomials where the a coefficient is greater than 1. So you can see here in the top right-hand corner, I have that same polynomial, ax squared plus bx plus c, but now a is going to be any number that's bigger than 1. So let's go ahead and see how we factor these. So let's go ahead and look at this first example, 4x squared plus 7r plus 3. Now, there's a little bit more work to do with these types of polynomials to get them factored. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to treat it very similarly to the other method we learned. I'm going to ask myself, is there a GCF that I can pull out? And in this case, there is not. So I'm going to start by taking my a coefficient and my c coefficient and multiplying them. So 4 times 3 is 12. So I'm going to go ahead and write it right up here. And then my center term here is positive 7. So I'm looking here for two terms that when they multiplied them together, that gives me 12, and when I add them, it gives me 7. So you can use your calculator for this, but my two terms, or my two factors, will be 4 and 3. Now, here's where things start getting a little different than the last method we learned. Here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to take my first term in my polynomial and I'm going to rewrite it. So 4r squared. Then I'm going to take this center polynomial and I'm going to break it into two pieces. The two pieces are my factors. So my first one's positive 4. So I'm going to write it as positive 4r. And my second one is 3, so that's going to be positive 3r. Notice how there 4r and 3r make 7r. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 3. This breaks it into 4 terms, because now I'm going to do something called grouping. I'm going to group the first two terms and the second two terms. And then I'm going to factor the GCF out of the first and the second. So let's just focus on the first. I can factor out a 4r squared plus 4r. I can factor out 4r. What I'm left with is r plus 1. In the second piece, now the goal here is to create a binomial that is the same as the other binomial, the r plus 1. We have to make them the same. So in order to do that, I have to ask myself, what did I pull out of that second piece to get that? And I pulled out a plus 3. In my head, I can also redistribute these to make sure that I got that original polynomial. Because here's how we create the factors. The first factor is what is repeated, the r plus 1. So I'm going to write that just once, r plus 1. That is one of my factors of this polynomial. The other factor will be what's left over, 4r plus 3. So I'm going to put that in parentheses, 4r plus 3. And I'm done. These are the two factors of my trinomial. Let's go ahead and look at another example. So we have 6 and we have positive 15. And by the way, there's no GCF in this one, so I just kind of passed over that. So 6 times 15 will give us 90. And then, of course, my negative 19 that's in the center. And I want two numbers that multiply to give me 90, and they add to give me negative 19. You can use your calculator for this, but my factors will be negative 10 and negative 9. Now let's go ahead and group. So I have 6x squared minus, now I'm going to go ahead and use the negative 9. I think that would be better to use here. So negative 9x minus 10x plus 15. And it does not matter the order of the factors. You will end up with the same answer in the end. All right, now that we're all broken up here, let's go ahead and group these two pieces. All right, let's look at the first piece and let's factor it. So I can factor out a 3x. And that means I'm left with 2x minus 3. I want to create a 2x minus 3 on the other side, so I have to ask myself, what did I pull out to get that? And I pulled out a negative 5. And again, I could redistribute that just to double check myself. And then we're done. My first factor will be what's repeated, so we have 2x minus 3. And then my other factor will be what's left over, 3x minus 5. And these are your two factors of your polynomial. Okay, now I want to show you something that's kind of cool. So these are factoring trinomials where you have a GCF. So sometimes you can actually pull the GCF out first, or you can do it at the end. So it doesn't really matter as long as you choose an option or choose a method that works best for you. So I'm going to show you pulling out the GCF in the beginning, what it looks like, and then at the end, and then you can decide what you like. So let's go ahead and do this first one. I see that there's a GCF of 2, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull that out, and then I'm going to factor everything else. So what's left over here is 4m squared plus 4m minus 3. Okay, so now I want to work with my trinomial that is in parentheses. Notice it's a trinomial with a coefficient a greater than 1. So I'm going to take the 4 times the negative 3, that gives me negative 12. My middle number is positive 4. My two factors will be 6 and negative 2. So when I write this down, watch what I do. This 2 out here, I have to make sure I carry him down because he's easy to forget about. But now I'm going to go ahead and factor what's inside here. So I'm going to use these things called brackets to kind of separate my pieces here. So here we have 4m squared. And I'm going to go ahead and use my negative 2 first. So negative 2m plus 6m minus 3. Now I'm going to go ahead and group those two pieces just like I would in any other example. But don't forget, you have to use this little 2 out here. You have to put him down there. So let's go ahead and factor this first piece. I'm going to factor out a 2m, which would leave me with 2m minus 1. I want to create 2m minus 1 on the other side. So in order to do that, I had to add 3. All right, I'm going to end it with brackets. And now I'm going to piece it together. So my repeated term is 2m minus 1. So I'm going to rewrite that. So 2m minus 1 here. What's left over is 2m plus 3. So 2m plus 3. And then I have my GCF. He is a factor. So I'm going to write that right out front. There are 3 factors to this, and you can see them all here. So that's what it looks like when you have a GCF as in your trinomial. Now, in this example, I pulled it out at the beginning. Let me show you what it looks like if I pull it out at the very end. Okay. So here we have 12 times positive 6, which gives us 72. And then I have negative 27. All right, so here we have 72, which is kind of a bigger number. So you might want to see, what your factors are. So I think it's going to be negative 24 times 3. Negative 24 minus 3, because negative 24 times negative 3 gives us 72, and then it also gives us, when we add it, negative 27. All right, those are my factors, so let's go ahead and break it up. And I know that we have a GCF here, but I'm not going to deal with that quite yet. So here we go, 12x squared, and I'm going to put negative 24 here, so negative 24x minus 3x plus 6. And I'm going to go ahead and group it into my two pieces. Here I can pull out 12x, so x minus 2. And then over here I also want to create x minus 2. That would leave me with a negative 3 out front. And now piece it together. So we have our x minus 2. Those are our common polynomials. And then we have what's left over, which is 12x minus 3. Now, if you did it this way, you will have to kind of rescan your factors again, because notice that 12x minus 3 is not factored. There's still a GCF in there. So I have to pull that out. So the GCF in this case would be 3. So I could actually rewrite this like this: 3 times 4x minus 1. So I could rewrite this whole thing with the 3 out front. So I have 3 times x minus 2 times 4x minus 1. And these are my 3 factors of this polynomial. Now that was showing you what it looks like at the end to pull it out. But if you prefer pulling it out at the very beginning, just don't forget about them in the end. All right, and that brings us to the end of our lesson on factoring trinomials with a coefficient a is greater than 1.